This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
Robert Green, Harwich, Massachusetts.
Okay. Hello. I have a few questions to ask you about your service in the military. So I'm going to start with some questions about your early life. Where did you grow up?
Detroit, Michigan.
Did you ever think you'd end up teaching in the military?
No, I didn't think I would be going in the military, though. That was certainly something that frequently people did face at that time. So, but it wasn't something that I had planned out ahead of time.
What influenced you to join?
Being drafted at the time, 1972, people, when they reached the age of 18, had to register for the draft, and then that was the primary way of bringing people into the military. And we had a major war going on in Vietnam at that time, and so I registered for the draft, but people who were in a four-year college program would be deferred. The title was deferred, or the word, from being called in the draft if they were attending. And when I completed my undergraduate degree and continued on in grad school, I lost the deferment that I had by being an undergraduate student. And so I eventually faced my draft board saying, come and take a physical and make sure you're physically able to serve, which I was. And so then I was faced with my plans that involved finishing up in grad school and trying to decide how to best accommodate that. And this may be too long an answer, but as it turned out, I was drafted into the Army, but I found by going around to the other services recruiting centers that the Navy had a plan that allowed you to sign up now and not enter for 6 to 9 months. And I needed the 6 to 9 months to finish up my graduate school work. I was working on a PhD in physics at the time and was very far along, and this allowed me to finish. And so my choice was to go in the Navy into an officer candidate program 6 to 9 months after I signed up. And the Navy sent a nice note to the Army saying, he's going in. So that was my path into the military.
So was there anyone that you were like close with at the time who was also drafted, or anyone that volunteered that you know, like family members or friends?
One of the things that happened with the draft was at about the same time that I was facing it, the decision was to reduce the number of deferments and to run a lottery. And in the lottery they picked out every day of the year, and the first day, if that was your birthday, it's a good chance you're going to be called. Actually, they went as far as 175 over the course of time, and my lottery number was low. But this is a lead into saying, yes, I know a number of people who ended up going into the military, but nobody in my immediate family had to be called up, because I had two brothers. One was quite a bit younger, and the other was just younger enough that by the time he finishes undergraduate, I think we were winding down the involvement in the war.
How did your family react when you informed them that you were going to be going and serving?
Well, I think it was there was no problem in any sense. My father had served in World War II. He had been in the Navy, so when he heard I was going in the Navy, he was very happy about that and felt it was a good branch of the service to enter. And I think everybody who had a family member go in was concerned about the risk that was involved and so I'm sure there was some nervousness in that regard, but at the same time it was a duty that was accepted as what you needed to do for your country if called.
Did you get any like praise or more respect from people in your community back home?
I don't recall that as being a factor I mean, not that it was disrespect, but I mean, I guess the people who knew were appropriately satisfied that I was doing my duty. And,
Okay.
appreciative, I guess would be a word. Yeah.
That's a good word. I heard you mention that your father was in World War II. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Did he have any like stories or experiences that he shared with you when you were younger, or?
Oh yes, from when I was young till when he was in his 80s. I heard a lot of World War II stories of his service, and I think that's there's sort of two aspects. One is the being in and the friends and the experiences that you have on one side, but then the risk on the other side.
So, what did you do before you started serving?
I was in graduate school. I'd basically been in school all my life up to the point where I went in the Navy.
Did you have any like plans for like a career path before you were drafted? Did it like blindside you, or?
I certainly had career plans, largely around continued research, and I was in elementary particle physics, looking at the very smallest components that make up atoms, and I anticipated being a faculty member somewhere. There was actually a new laboratory coming online in Chicago, and my advisor had sort of lined up for a good position in that, and those plans were put on hold for 3.5 years when military service came up.
3.5 years. Is that how long you served?
Yes.
Okay, that leads me into my next question. When did it begin and end? Like, do you have dates?
February 1972 to the end of June 1975. So I guess 3 years and 4 months. The basic scheme of it is that it was a 3-year enrollment that I'd agreed to, but that began after completing officer training, which was about 4.5 months long. And it was in Newport, Rhode Island, so it was a big move from Michigan to Newport, Rhode Island to go through training to become an officer, and then to be commissioned as a naval officer at towards the end of June of that year.
Okay, so now I'm going to be switching into questions more about your time of service. So can you like explain to me your position?
Yes, when I was going through officer training, we were being trained to be naval officers on ships, and that was what I expected. We were counseled on what we could ask for in our initial assignment, and I said, well, I do have advanced training in physics. Is there anything the Navy needs from somebody like me? And was told, no, not really. What type of ship do you want to be on? And then a couple of weeks before I was commissioned, I got a call from the people in Washington who were figuring out where to put all of us new naval officers, saying, well, don't you want to use your background? I said, well, yes, that would be nice. And he said, oh, we've got lots of places. Whoever told you that was before it was wrong. So it ended up that, well, I could have gone to a research lab or wherever I was assigned to. The place that they had an opening was at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland.
So who were the opposing sides at the time?
So you want to continue on?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
Well, from a broad U.S. perspective, the opposing sides was that the United States was supporting South Vietnam in a war against North Vietnam. North Vietnam was wanting to conquer South Vietnam and to reunite the country that was broken into two at an earlier point. And the Vietnam War was somewhat of a proxy war. We supported the South Vietnam, and Russia was supporting North Vietnam. North Vietnam wanted to go communist and take over the South, and the United States wanted to stop that from happening. And so that was the origin of the war. The U.S. was actually in the Vietnam War between 1955 and 1975. So my timing was sort of near the later stages of the war. It was a very severe war, as all wars are. There were, I think, 55,000 U.S. casualties, killed, plus a large number wounded and a large number suffering from what we now know as PTSD. There's quite a large new monument in Washington to commemorate those who gave up their lives during that war.
Did you find it was more severe towards the end of the war, or like did it get any?
I don't know. I think the last 7 or 8 years of the war were very intense. A lot of jungle fighting. I knew people who, as young men, seemed quite impervious to anything, but went in and were killed within a number of weeks of arriving in Vietnam. It was definitely a very impacting war. Part of it being the visibility because of the draft. Instead of it being an all-volunteer army, you could have people from any town drafted, and a very local awareness that so-and-so who lived down the street is there and potentially in harm's way.
So how long did they have to train before they were sent off?
This standard Army commitment, who did a lot of the fighting, though certainly the Air Force was running missions over it, the Navy was. The Navy had boats in the Delta area, and the training was generally 4 to 6 months, I would think, and they could be in Vietnam shortly thereafter, because there was a definite need to replenish because of the intensity of the fighting that was going on.
Okay, how high were you ranked?
Okay, so when you go in any of the military services, you have 2 groups of people, enlisted and officers, and each of the groups have nine different levels you can be at. And you generally start at the bottom level when you go in, so if you go in as an enlisted person, you start at the lowest enlisted rank. If you go in through officer training, as I did, you start at the lowest officer rank. In the Army, that would have been called a second lieutenant. In the Navy, it was ensign. So I started out as an ensign and was promoted up to the next rank, the second officer rank, which in the Navy is lieutenant junior grade, and that's where I was when my 3-year commitment ended.
Did you make any friends during your time of service?
Oh yes, very much so.
Do you still talk to them today?
Yes, matter of fact, one of the reasons that we're in Harwich is because of good friends we made, Joanne and I made with a husband and wife at the Naval Academy, and they went out to San Diego for further duty. We went our way, but eventually we ended up in New England, and they did too, and we came out to Cape Cod to visit them and fell in love with Cape Cod.
That's great. Did you have any students that misbehaved or like backtalked? Did you have any troublemakers?
Not really. The students who are accepted to Naval Academy are generally very good people and well behaved, and definitely there's a great awareness of rank, and I was an officer and they were midshipmen, and you really didn't have, and it's college, and I was never really disrespected when I taught at University of Michigan before I went in either. So I think it's at that stage of life, people who are there because they want to be, and are cooperative to learn.
Did you have any like remarkable students or students that stood out to you in a positive way that you still remember?
Well, there were certainly very strong students who who were accepted into and went through the Naval Academy, and I remember some, not as much by name as just by their demeanor and evident capabilities.
So, how did you feel sending your students off to war? Did you ever like create emotional attachments with some of them, or?
Well, I think not. Not really. I mean, I think in a general sense, it was part of the world we were in. Being in the military, that's something that you are called upon to do, depending on where the country is and what their needs are. I think while you get to know students, when you're teaching at the Naval Academy is essentially a college, and so you tend to see students for an hour a day for a semester, but it's not quite like the teaching relationship at earlier grades.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. Can you explain your best memory?
That's a good one. I think we were very fortunate to be at a place where I could contribute based on the background I had, but that was also a time which was less tense for other officers serving there who might have been in the regular Navy and rotated in, and here they were on shore duty where they weren't being shot at and they weren't having issues. So we had a lot of really good people that we got to know, and I think that was certainly a major thing, was our experience in general in the Navy. And we also had 2 children while we were in the Navy, and that's a really good memory too.
Can you explain your worst memory, if there was one?
I guess the first few weeks of officer training were quite, they're made to be difficult, to build a toughness to you or in you, and I don't think it's particularly a bad memory as much as it was probably the toughest time. One of the things that they do for the first couple of weeks is deprive you of sleep and yell at you a lot, and in general try to get you to come out the other end realizing that you can take a lot of that and it doesn't really change who you are and what you can be. And the explanation they gave is, well, you could end up a prisoner of war at some point in your service, and you need to be able to take severe environments, and so we take you through it in a controlled way and then hopefully bring you out the other end. And I think that was certainly one of the more demanding times. It was also probably one of the most useful in terms of going through life after that with the confidence that whether it's the business world or being a parent that you have. So that was good.
So, do you think that school that you taught at did take the right steps to really train these people to send them off? Do you think they did enough?
Oh, very much so. It was a very established procedure. Once students go in, it's not like going to college and living in a dorm or an apartment somewhere. It is their life 24 hours a day. They have summers where they do a lot of physical training and going on cruises in the Navy, because in the Navy to go on ships. But each day is a combination of a very military training throughout the day and physical training in addition to the class time and the class work. And they are never not on duty, so to speak, as midshipmen. And it's very difficult. Not all make it through, but those who do, I think we're ready to go and serve in the way that they were trained to.
So where did you live during your time of service?
My wife and I, Joanne and I, were in Navy housing on the base that we were at, the Naval Academy. And so we were in a unit that everybody in the units around us were other naval officers and their families. it was about half a mile from where I walked to each day to my office.
So can you give me like, sorry, like a rundown of like your everyday routine? Like how many hours were you teaching? Did you get to go home often or back to your housing?
Well, it was essentially a typical professorial job. I went in at 8 in the morning and got home by 5 in the afternoon. I may have to work some evenings on preparation or grading or whatever, but by and large, it was typical college level professor type role that I had. And as such, the usual load for college professors is to teach about 3 separate classes per term, and most of those met on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, but not both. So it was really more the preparation for and being ready to teach, as well as preparation in general in the discipline. I taught computer science, by the way, even though my formal training was physics. I had done a lot with computers, and the Navy needed that because they were forming a new computer science department at the Naval Academy. And so when they saw what I had to do with computers in my experimental physics work, they assigned me there, which was a surprise.
So you were back in the U.S. this entire time?
Yep, Annapolis, Maryland. Yep.
How was it like hearing news from what was going on over there? Do you have like one distinct memory of like hearing a news story or something that happened and your reaction? Or
No, I really don't. I mean, it was a very certainly there was news every day, and things were not going well towards the end of the Vietnam War, but I don't remember one particular incident or happening.
okay, so I'm gonna like shift more to questions after your time of service. What was the peace treaty that ended the conflict?
It was 1975. The main town in the south, Hanoi. I mean, not Hanoi. I can remember what it is now. Hanoi was the northern capital.
That's okay if you don't.
Saigon. Anyhow, it fell to the opposing side. And just prior to that, the United States had essentially been removing people and troops from the area. So it ended by having a victor, which was actually the other side.
Were you relieved when it was over?
Well, I think as a country, a lot of people were relieved, especially those who were of an age that they could have been called into it. It was a controversial war because instead of, as in World War II, it being clear that we needed to defend ourselves after being attacked, this was a much more discretionary war that the country decided to support a country far, far away, and there was very mixed feelings through the country about whether that was a good idea or not. And an awful lot of people were happy to see it end, but an awful lot were also hurt to see that it ended poorly in spite of the sacrifices made by so many people who lost their lives fighting in it. So it was, I don't know if there's ever a good ending to a war, but I think there was a relief to see it end.
You mentioned that there was a monument in D.C. Have you ever been?
We have not been to it yet. It was constructed, I'm not sure when, but since we have last been to D.C. It's a wall, a memorial wall, and inscribed on the wall is the name of every one of the 55,000 U.S. soldiers who lost their lives there.
Do you plan on going to it in the future?
Oh, yes.
So where did you go after it was over? Did you return back to Michigan or?
Well, the determining factor was not the war, because really it was my 3-year enlistment commitment, and I, the war was ending about the same time as I was finishing my 3-year time in the Navy, or as a naval officer. But in any case, what I then was doing was looking for a job. As I had completed my schooling in the nick of time before I went in, I had the experience of teaching at the Naval Academy. I wanted to be a college professor, so I started to, write to universities that were advertising for faculty, and ended up taking a job at State University of New York, campus at Brockport, New York, which is between Buffalo and Rochester.
That leads me to my next question. Was it difficult finding a job, or did it take you long, or were you able to like immediately get one the second you returned?
It wasn't a problem for me, and that it might have been actually if the Navy hadn't decided to assign me to computer science instead of physics, because it was harder to find jobs with a PhD in physics at that point. But everybody in the world needed to get into computing because it was the early days of computing. And the experience I had for 3 years teaching in a computer science department gave me opportunities to find similar jobs when I got out, and so it really wasn't a problem.
Did anyone you know die during the conflict?
Yes. We had classmates from my high school, friends, or at least one friend that I had met while in college, and then you go on afterwards and find that one of the people I taught with at Brockport had lost a brother, and everybody in some way was connected, either by people they knew or family members.
So what sort of ceremonies were like carried out to honor them, and did you attend any?
I was not at any particular ones. The people I knew, for example, from the Midwest, while I was out in Maryland, I didn't know till later years that they had passed away or died in the war. So the normal thing, obviously, is both the military aspect of the funeral and the fact that it's a loss in a funeral.
Do you know anyone personally today that has any PTSD from this war? Or
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How do they deal with it? Is it hard to see them like that? Or?
Well, because it was 40 some years ago, they certainly have availed. This person has availed himself of services largely through the VA administration, Veterans Affairs Administration. VA runs hospitals and treatment centers around the U.S., and it's one thing that, in addition to the physical issues from war injuries or wounds, certainly the psychological is a major one too.
All right, final question. How do you feel knowing that you were able to help people?
Well, I think I felt at the time, and I still do, that we have responsibilities, and I felt good that I met the responsibility that was asked of me. I was very fortunate that did not include being in the middle of a battlefield. But I think just like we need to vote, we need to defend our country when asked to serve.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.